Hi, I'm Ross Gates. Welcome to Masters of Marketing. Today we're going to be talking with a global expert at creative leadership. He's an executive director at Adobe, the author of the book Sorry Spock, Emotions Drive Business. And today, Adam Morgan will be teaching us about delivering content that has real value. Adam, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. So, like we were just going over before this started, can you give a little background on who you are, what drives you, what your passions are, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So the name is Adam Morgan. Right now I'm currently Executive Creative Director at Adobe. I've been there about 6 years. And before that, it was 20 years of ad agency life at a variety of big international agencies like McCann and Publicis and all of those good things. So my platform or what I'm all about, like you said, you mentioned the book. There's also a new podcast out. There's also a lot of articles and a lot of other things that I'm building, but it's all around this idea of creative leadership. Like if you look around the web, there are a myriad of websites and places where you can learn how to write better, you can learn how to design better. It's all about the craft, right? But there is very little in terms of leadership for creativity. There's a lot of just like general business leadership. But so that's my quest, is just to get like a Bible put together of all the, the ins and outs of creative leadership, and then, helping people sell good work, help people make good work. That's really my goal.
Gotcha. I like it. We were just getting someone on our team up to speed today going, this is the first meeting you have. You get to lead it. You get to make all the mistakes. So I like that you're driving people in that direction and you have tools to help them do that.
Yeah.
Without further ado, let's jump into your presentation that you have prepared. And then after that, we can go through and ask some questions.
Sounds good. All right. So today, what I'm going to be presenting to you is on the topic of attention span. So there is a lot of, and this is kind of just a little bit out of my book, just kind of one section, but there are a lot of truths out there that we have in content. A lot of rules like all the content in the web page has to be above the fold, or all the headlines have to be short and punchy, like 3 or 4 words, or people don't watch past 2 minutes of a video, so you should never make anything longer than 2 minutes. There's just so much out there. There's so many of those rules that it has to be snackable content. The attention span of all of our audience has just dropped and dropped and dropped, right? Those are the truths that we hear. And in fact, a year ago, it got to even a further extreme when the MMA came out with this idea of the 1-second strategy. They tested a bunch of, ads and things and mobile advertising with people. And they found that the human being, whatever, all of us, needs about 400 milliseconds or 4/10 of a second to engage with mobile advertising. And so this was the result of their finding. Their finding was, okay, you've had these you've had 15-second ads or 30-second ads, but now it's really marketers need to plan and address the first 1 second. Like if you want to engage audiences and you want to connect, you've got to make a 1-second plan. And I just want to just pause right there and just say, nope, hello. Like all of these truths, quote unquote, that we have, there's really something wrong about it because we're focusing on the wrong thing. So I'm going to give you an answer. Part of, when I looked into a lot of this around creativity and attention span and all these things, I wanted to find an answer that's void of subjectivity, because in our marketing world, everything's subjective, right? Especially with creative. So I'm going to dig in a little bit into neuroscience. So forgive me for like the next few minutes. I'm going to dig into a little bit of what's going on and then try and prove out why I think we're focused on the wrong things in content. So I'm going to start with, I interviewed a lot of neuroscientists, and this was just one, just to kick us off. Here's one quote from Dr. Stephenson. And he said, when our brain is doing its job at predicting our surroundings, our subconscious is in control. Only when there is an error or something doesn't match our predicted reality does the conscious brain kick in. Only then do we become aware and notice the element that's different. And the reason why is because our huge brains take a lot of energy and they need to be efficient. And so, if you think about all the data that our brains are taking in from all of our senses, right? If you think about your sight, smell, taste, all that, it's just loads and loads and loads of just data coming in all the time. And the way the brain works is it doesn't take in all data. We don't record everything that comes in. We only record or pay attention to the things that are different or the things that we attend to. Otherwise, it's all gone. Like with our vision, we're not seeing every pixel in front of us. We're only taking in a small amount. And there are tests, like you can stare at a blank wall, and if there's no new data, your eyes will shut off, right? So it's all about the anomaly. So the way that our brain focuses is by looking for anomalies. It's called anomaly detection. It's really important. So next point is, all right, so how do we make memories? Once we understand anomalies, how do we make memories? First, let's say you can encounter a new situation. You walk up and there's a big, huge thing of fire. Should I stick my hand in it? The first thing you do is your brain does a cross analysis with all the data that's in your brain to see if you already have that experience. And if you find a match, the way it responds back is through a quick hit of emotion, right? Emotions are all of those neurochemicals in our brain, like dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin. They're all the feelings of love and happiness, hate, anger, pride, all of that. So that's how we're communicated back really quickly of like, nope, don't stick your hand in that. That's a bad idea. But what happens if you come to a new situation you've never encountered? Let's say it's purple and green fire, and you're like, oh, this is magical. I should definitely touch that stuff. So what happens is then your conscious brain is notified, or the prefrontal cortex, the CEO of your brain, it's going to slow down. It's going to make a decision. And then the way it locks in that decision is by sending an executive order back into the rest of your brain and locking it with a new emotional file, right? That's how the brain communicates. It's through these neurochemicals. And if you think about the synapses between brains, it's really like the way that we're locking that down. There are a bunch of ones and zeros. We're making a memory trace. But the way we burn in that data on our brain is through little bursts of neurochemicals, little bursts of emotions. And so emotions have to be present in order to create a memory, and they have to be present in order to bring back a memory. So, and again, this is a 5-10 minute presentation. I'm not going to get into all the details, but the takeaway is that emotions are powerful, and the more emotion that's present during an experience, the better the memory. Take 9/11, for example. It's something that happened once. We always talk in B2B, like how many exposures to an idea do we have to have? Is it 3 with the repeating, number of ads, or is it 10? If there is a lot of emotion present, it can only be 1 exposure. 9/11 was 1 incident. And I guarantee you, everyone can think back exactly where they were standing, when they heard about it, what happened that whole day, and it happened once. So that's the important thing. So here's the takeaway from all of that. To increase the chances of your audience consuming your content, you need 2 ingredients. You need an anomaly and you need an emotion. When they're bombarded with millions of messages and data and through all of their senses, these 2 ingredients is it's what you need to break through or get engagement, right? So when we're talking about attention span, oftentimes with us getting like, it's just gotta be shorter, it's gotta be faster, it's gotta be critical. The question you should be asking is it unique and is it emotional, right? What are the things we should not focus on? We got to stop focusing on time and length and speed and all those things that we think are the right elements of making good content. It's not about, fast content. It's not about snackable. It's not about 3 seconds or 1 second or, this size or that size, this many words. What we should be focusing on is better quality content. The brain only attends and retains to experiences that are unique and emotionally charged, period. So, you all know this more than I, but content's all about value, the value we give to our audiences, right? So if we want to get more value from our efforts, we have to focus on the right things. We shouldn't focus on the process of content. I think that's the problem we are always stuck on, is the process of all the best practices on the net that you look out there. It's like, oh, it's all speed, it's all fast, it's all this, that. I think we just need to stop thinking about any of those things and really look back at your content and say, does it have substance first and foremost? Is it unique? Which means, does it have an anomaly? And is it creative? Which means, does it have emotion? Only then will your audience give you all the attention you want. If you have those elements there, they will give you attention and you will find value. So there you go. That's the point I wanted to make.
That's a very succinct, strong point.
Yeah.
Questions that I have that fall directly out of that is, does it matter which emotion? And
No.
do you think sentiment analysis is should be something that people focus on, or just the fact that it's something very strong, no matter if it's positive or negative?
Well, the truth is, as long as it's strong emotion, it will still lock in a memory. Like you can have PTSD from a very negative experience and it will lock in a very, very deep memory. But we've also noticed there's a whole separate book from Eric Duplessis called The Advertised Mind, where he studied thousands and thousands of ads to look for the thing that mattered the most, that broke through, that people connected with. And at first they were testing for again, back to should it be a 30-second spot? Should it be TV versus print? Is the media or the medium the thing that matters? And what they found, by and large, the thing that mattered the most is it likable? Likability was a huge factor. So if you're looking for the right emotions, sure, we can use fear and uncertainty and doubt, and we can use scare tactics, but those aren't the right emotions. Like if you're building a brand, likability is critical. So find positive emotions, make sure they're present, make sure there's a unique idea, wrap that all together in like a nice creative emotional blanket, and voila, like there's your engagement.
Can you give an example of an ad campaign that's used this strategy really well?
Like my personal or just in general?
Just in general,
Oh,
like,
there's so many. I mean, think about it. And here's the funny thing, like for years on the creative side, if you look back at all the award shows, there are, dozens and dozens of campaigns that we just feel and we like it. And we're like, we love it, but we can't attribute that to metrics. We can't say because it's creative, therefore it equals success. So campaigns from, Geico commercials, let's use that as an example. Like they're just silly and crazy. And, people could argue, where's the strategy? They're just doing wacky, crazy stuff on it. But they're still hitting an emotion. They're emotionally connected with the audience and then dropping that, 15 seconds or more, at the end. So it's still connecting and it's still working, and it's been highly successful. So creative ideas, which is kind of when I associate creativity with emotion, that's really like when you're building an experience, emotion is what we as creative people are going after. We're trying to connect emotionally. So any of those creative campaigns that have that emotion, I think are connecting. And now that we know the science and it's finally caught up, I think we can finally attribute, okay, that's why things are working, and it's why it's working in the brain, rather than it's just like, oh, I just kind of feel it in my gut and it's awesome, and let's just keep trying it, but we don't know if it's working or not, right?
right. I totally agree with the Geico campaigns. Like you're saying the campaigns to yourself years later because you remember a commercial. Have you read The Power of Habit? I'm sure you have because you have a huge bookshelf behind you where they talk about,
That's so funny.
it's on there somewhere.
It's up there and I haven't read it all. I mean, I've read like papers on it and gotten the gist of it, but I haven't digested the whole book. But.
Gotcha. So I think that what you're saying is tied to that book, where yours is the step of taking a moment, putting an emotion, and The Power of Habit all talks about from that emotion, taking an action, and then you become so used to that action that you always take it. Is there a way that you've seen this tied to campaigns where, let's say when I grew up, there was a commercial that had a jingly phone number where you just end up singing it over and over and over. Are there campaigns where you've seen people tie an emotion to taking an action or something after someone sees a campaign so that they never forget it?
And what you're talking about is like the classic pitch of how a good idea will get into customer loyalty, right? And it's, we talked about the first half of that of like finding the anomaly, putting the emotion in it. But as you keep going down that whole, train of thought, it's once I've engaged with something, once I've gotten something that's sticky, right? And then if they've liked it, because we talked about likability a minute ago, then you get to where does it resonate? So you could have all of those elements in there and it doesn't resonate or stay because people don't believe it. It's not authentic. It's not, it doesn't feel right. It's like against brand or what they believe in. And so if you can get campaigns that have the emotion, have the anomaly, are likable, and they ring true and they're believed, that point, as long as you don't screw it up with a crappy PR stunt or something like that, for the most part, you're going to have engagement. And especially like today with cause marketing and so many other, elements that people attach to their campaigns, that's where people are going to find loyalty and stick with you because they're principles that they believe or they're elements that they feel. Like a Geico, you're still going to love those campaigns. If one comes up, you're like, oh, I got to watch this one, right? Because over time, you haven't been deceived. You still have that authenticity. You still know what you're getting.
Still have
as long as you don't screw it up, that's when you're going to get to customer loyalty and retention. So yes.
There's a good question actually from the audience that follows that up, which is, how do you strike the balance between credibility and emotional content? If you're, I won't even qualify it more than that, but I want to.
Sure. Credibility. I have this argument is the wrong term. I have this discussion with partners or stakeholders all the time. And it's a lot of times we try and say, okay, there's a certain amount of things we just have to do to be credible. We have to look a certain way to be a B2B company. We have to use certain terms in an industry to be credible. We have to do certain things that are not creative, but they're just like baseline. And I would say, to me, it really is a balance. Like when I come in hot and heavy, I'm not saying we got to do crazy as the Geico commercials for every single company. End of story. That's not what I'm saying. You have to strike a balance. In fact, through my whole book, it's all about this balance between logic and data and emotions and creatives, right? And creative, bringing those two together and finding the right balance. And there's a time and a place for all of those things. So is credibility important? Absolutely. Should I use some of those words? Maybe. Like at Adobe, we'll say, one of my rules is in content when we're writing it, if you start putting too many of those credibility words in there, or too many jargon words or industry words or tech words, suddenly the whole thing's clogged up and it starts to sound like we're an engineer, right? Rather than a brand. And so for me, it's all about bringing space to it. So how do I use those words that give me credibility and then use the emotional words and just balance it out? Like maybe my rule is one of those crazy words per sentence, period. One jargon word, one credibility word, one whatever per sentence. And then if you have two of them that you have to use, then just break it up and give it space. And I think that gives us humanity. That gives us the balance between logic and data and emotion and creative. And you can still have all of it in there. So it's finding the right time and a place to use those types of things.
How would you break that into a Geico commercial where they never actually say, we're experts in insurance, funny skit? It's just funny skit because you already know. If you're a new brand and you're going to make a commercial per se, where would you put the credibility into it before you just have fun?
Sure. A lot of that balance is, where do you bring in the sell, right? Where do we bring in the information that's not just the funny, creative, emotion-y stuff? And it's really tricky and it all depends on what type of product you're trying to sell, right? It's easy for Geico because all they're selling is insurance. They're not saying anything more than that one word, and you understand that space. If you're in B2B and you're selling some piece of technology that's like, here's how we're going to help with, multi-channel engagement through programmatic something, right? It's really, really tricky. And so for me, is half of my job is, how do I distill all of that stuff down to the simple human truth? Like I've got to find that one simple truth. And then depending on the medium, like that's where I'll dig into it. So let's say it's a banner ad going to an event where we're going to talk about B2B marketing. Find that simple human truth, that nugget. And I'll tell you, that's hard. Like in working with all the strategists, it's easy to be tactical in strategy. And right, here's all the different, things that we're going to do tactics wise. But when you get into true like visionary strategy, it's really hard. And so for people to distill it down to one, like I always call it a hierarchy of messages, like start at the top, what's the main point, and then go down from there. Because we flood it with a million of these parts of our B2B story, right? You just have to find that human truth. That's one simple thing that's going to move the needle. And then from there, then it's easy. Then I know, okay, I introduce that in the right way when it's not heavy-handed. If I have gone through my emotional, hook in the beginning, and then I get to the meat where I need to give them the idea of what we're about, it all depends on the placement. So if it's a TV spot, yeah, then once I have them engaged, and again, if we're going back to neuroscience on this, I'm sorry, I realize that we're on a short timeline here, so I can't get too deep, but you have a fast and a slow system, right? There's two different systems that play in your head. Your emotional system is fast, your logical system is slow. So in engagements, the first thing that you need to give to a person who's totally new to your space has to be emotional. Once you've gotten them in the gate, then you can start to layer in a laddering effect down to logic, and you can get into that hook or that sales play. If they're totally new to the space, you have to have more emotion to get them connected with you and believe in you before you're getting to that sale. If they already know you and they're going to your website and you're in a deep funnel product page, you don't have to have a lot of emotion. You can quickly, be somewhat humane or have a little bit of humanity, but then you can quickly get into that logic. And then you have a lot more space to explain your B2B programmatic idea, right? So it's a time and a place. And we call it our tone hierarchy, like where it's like finding what the entry point is, how much the audience already knows, how much emotion and creative, and then balance out how much we get into that credibility aspect later on. And that will always change based on where they are in the funnel and how much they know about you and all of that stuff. So there's not a perfect answer for that.
Adam, this is great. This is great content. It's really hard to argue with you on a lot of these points. But we have an awesome question from the audience that kind of it's the big giant persona question, right? So when you're thinking about the content, how do you think about the content applying equally, or do you want to start to identify and slice up the content that you have per persona? And then does that persona have different emotional triggers, and what stage of their content development do you think about starting this?
Oh, 100% on all of that stuff. So first of all, we live in a world like when I've been talking about programmatic and other things, like absolutely we're doing experiences that are trying to go to the individual, not big mass, groups. And now that we have personas, that's like the next step up, like a group of people. 100% we need to know our personas. 100% we need to know our audience. And, of all companies, Adobe, with Adobe Analytics, we believe in digging deeply into those customer profiles, whether it's a persona or an individual or whatever, and finding the insights, finding the anomalies that they care about and believe in. Like that's what all the data half of all this stuff is. You should be using all of your insights, all your data, whether it's, behavioral data, whatever it may be, to get in and understand that audience or that persona so that you can cater and create experiences that are personalized for them. So doing that at scale is really tricky. It's really hard. And so let's say even if you just had, 3 personas, absolutely, it would be using the data to get the insights to find what do they care about, what are their emotional triggers, I call them, emotional triggers. Once you have those emotional triggers, then it's easy to say, okay, I'm going to build this whole drip campaign that goes through their whole funnel. I'm going to have more emotion at the top, less as they get deep into it, but you create that whole drip campaign. And then I'm going to have, specific creative experiences along the way that tie to those emotional triggers. So if I had an email campaign and you were, in one of my persona 3, and I know that your emotional trigger is X, therefore in that whole context of creativity, I'm going to deliver a whole bunch of chunks, and then whatever, you can use AI or whatever your platform you're using, but you're really delivering things that are trying to connect that anomaly and emotion to their emotional triggers that you've already found through data and connect them. Like the better you can do that throughout that whole process, the more you're going to have success, the more you're going to connect with your audience. So that was a lot in just a couple sentences, but hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, I think I watched this presentation from this awesome marketer I respect, and he said you always need to speak to the inner child of your audience at every single touch point. What's really interesting about your content is I see we do a lot of analysis and sentiment analysis in terms of SEO right now. And what we are finding in the data that we're doing back in our research and some of the research we're reading is that in the search engine in Google, if you have a positive sentiment analysis title, that gets clicked on more than a negative sentiment analysis. And on social, that the negative emotion in the click title and the title basically has more clicks and more engagement, and people rage out on different and negative emotional titles. My challenging question to you was, because most newspapers and journalism is now trending negative, do you believe that they're diminishing their brand because the first indication of it is not a positive experience? It's like they're continually hitting me with negative. Do you think that long-term diminishes the brand of a newspaper, or because journalism is such a specific kind of industry that they'll be okay with that?
I think the first thing you have to assess before you try and compare apples to oranges in that whole situation is what's the mindset of the audience in all of those viewing experiences. When people are going to the news, they're not going for positive brand sentiment, right? And in social, to a certain extent, I believe why some of that negative stuff works, why clickbait works, is because sometimes, there are people who are just sitting and going through the feed and just looking for, train wrecks, right? They just want to see train wreck and you can't stop looking at it. But that doesn't necessarily mean they want to put all their money into that, right? There's a big difference between what I'm going to pay for and then what I'm just going to casually view. And so a lot of times with our content, it's very tricky because you want to just do everything. They're like, oh, because of this thing got clicked on, and it has this negative effect or, a negative emotion or whatever. You have to separate the data and really look at at their experience of what they're going for. Because I think, like I said earlier, there's a resounding answer that likability helps with building a brand. And maybe with newspapers and maybe with some social stuff, people aren't caring or looking for the brands. They're just looking for sideshows. Like they're willing to give a lot of attention to silly, stupid things. But the second you say pay money, they're going to back way off, right? Like you can go to BuzzFeed and get 1 million clicks, but the second you're saying pay me lots of money, like they're done, they're out. Because their expectations of that viewing experience is entertainment and just junk show, right? But if you're saying like now give money, then they're going to be like, no, the money I'm going to give when I'm going to pay for a brand experience, I'm going to make sure it's something that's connected to something I really truly believe in. And that people may not believe in bad news stories on newspapers, but they're still going to give attention to it if it's a different viewing experience. So I don't know if I've answered, but in my mind, it makes total sense. Like there are some instances that are purposely built for, whether it's clickbait or news or other things that are just a segmented thing from stuff that we're willing to give money to and stuff we're willing to pay for. And then, and that's where different emotions apply.
When you say you want to do repeated good emotions and repeated actions to get someone to remember you, are there tools that you use to know when you've hit a person enough times to have that emotion? Or not even just tools like they have 19 views of this, but is there a way to know that your message has sunk in on a deeper level and that they've reached a certain emotional connection with you?
Yeah, that's the Holy Grail. And if you look back, it's like, what the question you're asking is, how do I measure if there's enough emotion present? How do I measure if it's the right emotions? How do I measure emotion? And in research right now, it's really easy to measure logic. There are so many ways, from surveys and focus groups and a whole bunch of other ways. And I haven't found the perfect answer of how to measure it. Like, we've worked with some companies. At our big event, Adobe Summit, a couple of years ago, we had a company come in that they can stick something on you and you can watch ads and things and they can measure emotions that way, right? And some of the research firms like Millward Brown or Braden Juicer, like, they're introducing now like ways to measure emotion or your FAST system in content research, because we don't want to put something out there unless we're like, is it the right emotion? Are they connecting? Or like you're saying, have I given them enough exposures to it? So there isn't a good company or a good product that does that yet. I think I see a lot of companies on the verge of getting there, but it's still like clunky. Like, they're amazing tests. I could tell you a whole story about the father of neuroeconomics and how he could put someone in a study, hook them up, and get within like an 86% accuracy of whether they'll spend money on your product afterwards. But it's just not practical right now. Like, no one wants to get hooked up to a fMRI machine and then watch the ad, right? So I don't see those programs and things out there. The best thing that I can do, that I've come up with, is when you know the principles, like I said in the beginning, you know the elements that need to be present for a good experience. If that's an anomaly, if that's emotion, if that's emotional triggers, whatever those are. At least right now, you can go back to your brief on your brief that you're creating some new campaign and say, do I know the triggers? Do I know what my anomaly is? Do I know what the experience is? And is there enough emotion present? And at least you can make the A plus B equals C equation and say, I've got all the right parts and pieces there. Now let's just test it. Let's throw it out in the world and see what happens. So how do I know if after 3 exposures it's right, or after 10 exposures? I don't know of a tool that's going to measure that, but you're going to see your wave of like sales, and then it's starting to go down. Nope, I need a new ad, right? So I think that's the common sense on it.
With just a few minutes left, I have one very tactical question. So earlier on, you were saying that you need to get your authority out there by basically distilling what people believe and then saying it somewhere in your ad, so that you don't have to say, I'm an expert, but they know that because you've distilled what they know, that you know the subject. How do you combat when someone sends something like a cold email and there's kind of a negative association with that, and people call out the fact that, hey, I've never met you before, there might be a negative association, but we should still get to know each other? Do you think that people benefit from calling out and knowing there's a negative emotion there, or from disregarding it and just trying to build a happy emotion on top of that?
Great question. Who knows what's going to work? Like, when I look at that, like, someone who just does a cold call or a cold email and says nothing about it and just, it's straight, it's dead 100%, right? Someone calling it out, what they're really doing, it's just like comedians. They'll break fourth wall and they'll speak the emotions that they're feeling out loud. Like Owen Wilson, good example of just like saying it out loud, and then we think it's funny, right? What they're actually doing is, like, by spelling some of that out, they're breaking that barrier by doing an anomaly. That's an anomaly of like twisting and exposing that. And then depending on how they say it, like, is their voice, the way they're writing that, in a way that's approachable and nice, and like, I feel like, oh, this is someone who I could connect with, versus a sales pitch. So I think you gotta dig deeper. It's more than just saying, oh, every time you do a sales, cold email, you got to call it out that you're sorry, it's a cold. No, that's not the answer. The answer is you have to craft that message with all the little mini emotional triggers. Like, even like, there are certain words that are packed with emotion built right in. There's a whole, like, it was a share through. They did a whole study on these emotionally packed words. Maybe you have one of those in there. Maybe you have some of those other things that is really connecting faster rather than just calling it out. So I think there's so much more to it than just saying a cold open.
Perfect. Great answer. With 1 minute left, I have 2 questions in one so they can be breezed through quickly. The first one is, where do you go to learn material and stay ahead of the curve? And the second one is, where can people learn from you, and where's the best place to connect with you and learn more?
Sure. The rule I say for me, and to my team all the time, they're probably sick of hearing it at Adobe, is to lead, you have to read. I read a lot. I don't know, like, the bookshelf behind me is not just like it's not showing it off. Like, I really have a lot of books, and I read a lot of books. I read a lot of articles. I read a lot of stuff. So I would say if making a habit of reading is where you're going to stay ahead of the curve, sorry. So read to lead, that would be my one message. And then to find me, I shared it up here earlier. I can share that again. It's, you can go to my website, adamwmorgan.com, and there you'll find, a whole bunch of my presentations. It'll link to my Medium articles. There's a whole bunch of articles on creative leadership and content marketing and all that good stuff. You could email me if you wanted, connect on LinkedIn. Like those are usually the platforms. I have a new podcast dedicated to creative leadership called Real Creative Leadership. We've just recorded I think I did the 8th episode this weekend, but it'll be launching soon on realcreativeleadership.com. So those are some of the ways that you could stay connected.
That's awesome. Adam, thank you so much for coming on Masters of Marketing.
Yeah.
Anyone who wants to learn more about neuroscience, emotion, content, podcasts, I would encourage you to reach out to Adam. These were great questions, very in depth, and I wish we had more time. We'd love to have you back. Thanks so much.
No sweat. Thank you. See y'all.
See ya. Bye.